Hello, my name is Matthew Heikov with BMC Atrium Orchestrator. Today, I'd like to talk about best practices for planning your Atrium Orchestrator grid. By preparing the grid appropriately for your environment and what you want the grid to do, you can prevent many issues with sizing, workflow load, and grid communications. Before you install anything, you must know what Atrium Orchestrator needs for normal operation. Consider the system requirements for each type of peer and make sure your planned environment matches them. If your server does not have enough memory to run a peer, that peer may not be able to run properly and may exhaust its resources. The values here are for production environments in BAO version 7.9. You may need lower values for development or higher values for high load environments. Check the documentation for your version of BAO for more information. You should also decide what you want your peers to do. Atrium Orchestrator grids have 3 peer types, and each has a different role. The only mandatory type of peer is the Configuration Distribution Peer, or CDP. After that, you can add more peers of any type to a grid, but you should avoid adding peers with larger system and workload footprints when peers with smaller footprints will do. You may not need multiple CDPs if you only use Grid Manager on one of them, and if you only want a peer to host adapters on a jump box, it might not need to be a job processing peer at all. You cannot change the type of a peer after it joins the grid, so consider what you need from a peer before you install it. Once you know what types of peers you need, you must decide how many peers to use. It is important to note that a grid's capacity and throughput do not increase when you add additional peers. That is, a grid with 4 job processing peers will not process more jobs or process jobs faster than a grid with 2 peers. Often the opposite is true, because every peer in the grid communicates with every other peer. In a grid with only 2 peers, each peer only needs to send updates to and receive updates from one other peer. As you add more peers, those peers must spend more time and resources talking with all other peers. And in high load scenarios, that can affect throughput. This includes Development Studio. A running Development Studio counts as a peer, and if several users are running Development Studio at once, that increases the communication load, not unlike adding several peers. Because of how peers exchange information and how much they exchange, BMC recommends using no more than 2 CDPs and 2 APs on the same grid. If you know you need a larger number of peers than BMC recommends, or if you are going to process a high load for a long time, consider not 1 grid, but 2 or more. Adding a grid can increase BAO's throughput because separate grids do not communicate with each other and share no system resources. You can use a single repository and authentication service, like a standalone Remedy single sign-on, for multiple grids, so you will have no problems managing users across grids or moving adapters and modules from one grid to another. Also, if one grid goes offline, the other grid will continue working because they do not rely on each other. You can use multiple grids for multiple data centers or for performing different operations, depending on what you need each grid to do. Once you have your grid architecture designed and everything installed and running, you should verify that BAO is performing as you need. Often, the load on a grid gets higher over time as it runs more workflows, integrates with more systems, or handles requests from more users. As with any system, you should occasionally reevaluate BAO to make sure it is handling the load you have on it and any load you intend to add. BMC recommends reviewing the grid's health every time you add a major use case or a few times a year. If you have a development environment, a good way to do this is to add a representative load to that grid and see how it performs. For more information about checking BAO's health, you can view the video BMC Atrium Orchestrator Checking Grid Status via Health Metrics. By planning your grid appropriately, and by monitoring it periodically to make sure it works with any later plans, you can preempt memory or load issues and ensure BAO runs smoothly. Thank you. Have a nice day.